Through its Belt and Road Initiative, China has made its mark worldwide, funding projects as far-flung as power plants in Ecuador and high-speed rail in Laos. But exactly what is the Belt and Road Initiative?
The idea of the Belt and Road Initiative was to develop connectivities between China and the global south. The bulk of Belt and Road financing has gone into hard infrastructure sectors such as transportation, energy, mining, and projects of that sort. But China has now also folded a lot of their cultural initiatives, their educational initiatives, scholarships, Confucius Institutes and others into this big juggernaut of the Belt and Road Initiative.
Amar Malik is Senior Research Scientist at AidData, a university research lab at William & Mary that has been collecting information on China's development finance around the world. The data show that in the past 20 years, the country has emerged as the lender of first resort for many developing countries. The origins of the Belt and Road Initiative, or BRI, trace back to a time of global economic instability, says Min Ye, an expert in Chinese political economy at Boston University.
The background story was the 2008 global financial crisis, and the world market was shrinking. So China invested heavily in building these companies, roads, bridges, factories to produce cement, steel, equipments, power devices, everything. And then the need was reached the top. Right? So they begin to have a lot of factories were overproducing. 2011-12, China's overcapacity ranging by sectors was about 30% to 80%. And so when Xi Jinping came to power in 2012, China actually was in deep overcapacity crisis.
Then in November 2013, President Xi launched what is now known as the Belt and Road Initiative.
When the Belt Road was announced, it was just fascinating to see these industrial regulators, businesses, local governments hurrying to seize the opportunity to invest abroad, export abroad as well.
Belt and Road is not a single entity. It is not a budget line in the Chinese government's budget. It is a concept. It is an umbrella under which many entities are delivering projects in many countries across many sectors around the world. China has built some of the world's biggest and largest pieces of infrastructure, including bridges, tunnels, high-speed rail, and they have created a huge ecosystem of state-owned enterprises and financial institutions which have a huge amount of ability to do construction work around the world.
It's more China's globalization strategy and how to promote, facilitate Chinese businesses and other organizations go global. Countries, in particular in the global south, has a real need for infrastructure, for goods, and for connection with China. So now it's more like a global initiative rather than just a China initiative.
Many host countries benefited from Belt and Road projects. In 2016, then President Rafael Correa of Ecuador celebrated the completion of a Chinese-built power plant.
Inauguramos la obra más grande construida en el país.
We inaugurated the largest infrastructure ever built in this country, the hydroelectric plant Coca-Codo Sinclair. That plant, with a power of 1,500 megawatts, could provide electricity alone to all the homes of Ecuador.
Indonesia is the home of another Chinese project, a high-speed train.
It normally takes up to 4 hours, but with high-speed train, I hope it can reduce to 1 until 2 hours.
But some Belt and Road projects have had a downside. In Ecuador, thousands of cracks appeared in part of the hydroelectric plant, worrying engineers, even though China says the plant, having been tested by a third-party agency, is safe. And as for Indonesia's high-speed rail,
the construction process uses blasting techniques that damage people's houses. This is what I'm really worried about. If it shifts, the roof will also fall.
As with many infrastructure projects, there will be winners and losers, Malik
So, for
says.
instance, if you are living right next to a highway and you don't own a car, or you are a low-income worker and cannot afford to take that expensive high-speed rail, you may have a very different view of the project that was implemented in your neighborhood.
China observers say that after a decade of implementing Belt and Road projects and fighting the pandemic, Beijing may be recalibrating.
Many experts are calling it BRI 2.0, and it is obvious to us that the era of cheap money with low interest rates and large-scale mega projects is likely over.
The pandemic in the past 3 years really halted a lot of things. I think the most important reason still was trying to realize that there's a lot of challenges, or kind of Beijing probably overestimated their ability to implement an agenda which was not very clearly defined in the first place, or not very well articulated.
China is now the world's largest debt collector because a lot of these loans that they had given out during the first 5 years of the Belt and Road era are now only coming due for repayments. And they're realizing a lot of the projects are not as commercially viable as they thought that they might be.
China will still do infrastructure, maybe not the kinds of large-scale special economic zone, such as the Qatar port in Pakistan. They will still do a lot of power plants investments because the global south needs power, but it will not be coal-powered.
The motivation for China to initiate the Belt and Road Initiative was to kind of have to hedge against the potential conflict with the U.S. probably, and by doing all these things, by showing the kind of activism on these fronts through the BRI, kind of convinced the U.S. and the other powers that China is ambitious. China has these intentions to kind of rewrite or reshape the global order. So that might end up intensifying the conflicts.
The Belt and Road Initiative has expanded China's footprint around the world, and the scope of Beijing's global influence has changed how the U.S. and its allies see China. Some officials warn China is a threat and is no longer the world's factory of cheap exports.
Europe suddenly realized that China was coming to Europe and buying up strategic critical infrastructure. It changed their perspective on China.
I don't think it's going to help China become a global hegemon like the US or UK in the past. That's because China's economy is still hugely internally oriented. How much China would commit to BRI is decided by how much it helps or works for China.
Like other large-scale powers, China is keen to increase its global influence, and they would like to develop long-term sustainable engagements with elites in developing countries. They are opening up their universities to foreign students like never before, and they are much more likely to engage in cultural exchanges and to win over public opinion toward China.
As Beijing paves the path toward an era in which China is one of the largest powers in the world.